And here we go. Okay.
Great. Hi, I'm Tehi Nam and a partner at Storm Ventures, and appreciate everyone taking time to join us in our webinar. So today I'm really excited to introduce Rahul Parikh, an EIR at Storm, and more importantly, a superstar Chief Customer Officer. And we're really fortunate that he's here to share with us his thoughts on how customer success can support a company's growth from 1 million ARR to 50 million ARR. Many founders have asked me this question, but today I can really defer to a real expert here. Rahul has the perfect background for this topic. He's personally scaled companies from 5 million ARR to 200 million ARR, and he's led customer success and operations in a wide range of companies, ranging from early stage private companies to public companies like Zuora. So now with a short introduction, I pass it over to Rahul and really look forward to hearing his insights. Thank you, Rahul.
Well, thank you, Tehi, for the warm and kind introduction. I also want to introduce Sam Westmore, who will be curating the questions during the webinar. So if you have a question, please, you can use the raise hand button at the bottom of the Zoom window there, or just feel free to type a question in the comment section, and Sam will make sure that she stops me at the right point to ask the question. So I am so excited to discuss customer success and its evolution. There's very little reference material on this subject right now, and so hopefully our discussion today can add some insights. So Frank Slootman. So for those of you who don't know Frank Slootman, he is the wildly successful CEO of Snowflake. He published a book called Amp It Up last year, and it was one of the best-selling business books of the year. Mr. Slootman recommends not necessarily building out a separate CS department when you're building a software company. Instead, he suggests the customer-first mentality should be a part of the DNA of a company. While I agree with the customer mentality part, not having a dedicated CS team can lead to missed opportunities when you're thinking about unlocking growth. And Sam, if you could go to the next slide. So first of all, I'm no Frank Slootman. I admire him. I think go one slide back. Yes. So I'm no Frank Slootman. I admire him immensely. There are some things that I think should be considered when thinking about customer success, and in this particular case with Mr. Slootman. The experience at Snowflake might be an extreme unicorn example. Not every software company can do what Snowflake has done in the short amount of time it's been around. And in actuality, 45% of customer success teams currently own revenue. So it's already happening, and most companies are adopting the CS model. Customers really do want a trusted guide to advise them on the hero journey, and no one's better suited to do that than customer success managers. So CS experts can orchestrate customer journeys and expansion opportunities for software companies. And this skill set is not easily replicated by other teams within a software company, like, so for example, product folks or sales folks. Finally, CS really does drive product innovation. So CS is at the tip of the spear, working with customers on all different types of issues and challenges. And what they learn can really contribute to the product feedback loop. So having the voice of CS being the voice of the customer can really drive product innovation. So, the question needs to be asked. Frank has services, support, training in his model. So really, are the differences really meaningful? I would suggest not. So maybe let's talk about how I would think about building CS teams at different stages of growth. So, in this discussion, we'll be talking about the strategy, the organization, the ideal leader, and the important metrics at the 3 stages of growth. So I'm going to talk about growth at 1 million, 5 million, and 50 million plus. But before we get into those details, I want to talk about some of the basic considerations across all 3 stages of growth. And Sam, if you could go to the next slide. So I believe that there are 4 pillars that every CS team should have. You don't need all of these to be fully fleshed out when you're first starting out, but this kind of gives you a reference as you're building out these teams in this organization. So the 4 pillars: growth. So this includes key customer insights, driving adoption, the pre-sales experience for the customer, as well as renewal and expansion orchestration. You also have a professional services pillar and team. This includes all of your onboarding activities, your ongoing managed services, your integration services, your program management, and if you have a partner ecosystem, the operational aspects of a partner ecosystem. Support, I think most people are very familiar with this one. And then finally, community. This may be a new concept. The purpose of community is to propel your customer hero through their journey. Now, this includes best practices, training, customer reference programs, advisory boards, and customer marketing functions. And the foundational layer underneath all 4 of these pillars is operations. And Sam, if you could go to the next slide. So when I speak to founders about CS operations, typically the first words that I hear from them is, oh, we've got this covered, we've got RevOps. But does RevOps really do all of the things that are mentioned here? And I'm not going to clear all the little activities and tasks, but you could see them there. And for the most part, most RevOps teams don't do all of these things. So, the operations function in CS are typically well beyond what a sales-oriented RevOps team would do. So if your RevOps teams are not thinking about these things, they should, or you should consider a separate CS ops team. And Sam, if you could go to the next slide. So I just mentioned the hero customer journey a couple of times. A great framework to think about the customer experience is the hero customer journey. So Tehi, who introduced me today, has spent many years thinking about how to unlock growth. I'll quickly walk you through this, but this could be a webinar in itself. I would highly recommend visiting the link at the bottom right corner of this screen for more information. It's really useful information. But the key takeaway after I explain the 9 steps of the journey is tying this to the evolving CS function. So the purpose of the 9-step process is to begin defining customer empathy and end with making the customer a champion, right? And so the customer hero is typically the person who influences the economic buyer to buy the solution. They're not necessarily the economic buyer. So step 1 in this journey, you have to answer the question of why now? What is the urgent pain? Step 2 is you have to get the hero excited. In other words, what's the date wow? You go to then step 3, which is why should the hero choose you, or what's the merry wow, so to speak? Step 4 would be, it's really about overcoming the anxiety of signing the first contract and getting the customer over that hump. Step 5 is about the hero achieving the first value, which is really defined as the clear communication from the economic buyer to the customer hero that the purchase was a right decision. Step 6 is about ensuring that the solution becomes the standardized workflow within the team. And then step 7, it really is the full deployment of the use case. And it really is one of the proudest moments for the hero along the journey. Step 8 is having the solution used for new use cases or new economic buyers and champions. This also is a point of risk in the hero journey. It's a point where you can fail or step down. But finally, if you can get through these 8 steps, the last step is really the customer hero having some type of career progression. So each of these steps is highly measurable. And as I said, Tehi's website that's listed there can go through this in a little bit more detail. So, what are some of the reasons why heroes don't make it through this journey? Sam, if you could go through to the next slide. So, failing the first renewal can be a death sentence for the hero. And so I'll just walk through some of the reasons. So typically some of the common reasons, and I go through this as a CCO when I'm meeting with board members or, meeting with our C-level teams of, why we're not getting customers renewed. And, one of the biggest reasons is, we don't get the first value timing. It doesn't align with the customer's strategic imperative. And, an example of this would be a bad launch, or we don't The solution doesn't become standard workflow. There's not enough core users using the platform. And, in essence, the use case was not solved with product market fit. The original quantifiable goal for buying isn't met. You see poor adoption, or there is a technical blocker in the process that was not foreseen through the sales process. There could be a customer externality, something that you can't control, the hero can't control. These are things like bankruptcies, M&As, government regulation. You have a mass layoff event. These are typical things that may happen. You could have a change of buyer. Now, I'm not a huge fan of this reason. I typically believe that this is a red herring for something else, which typically is not enough value shown to continue the relationship. Another reason could be a competitor's out positioning you. And then finally, you're not really on the path to becoming a hero. In essence, the solution doesn't meet that mission criticality test, and it's seen as a nice to have, not a must have. So next, we're gonna set up an early warning system to prevent this outcome. Sam, if you could go to the next slide. So net usage retention is your early detection system. Net usage retention is a new metric that is a leading indicator and predictor of customer outcomes. Most current metrics, such as gross retention, net retention, that you've probably seen and used, measure performance are kind of like lagging indicators that tell the story after the fact. Founders and go-to-market leaders need something actionable today, and we believe that is NUR. So if you look at the slide, the example here, the first thing you see is the starting consumption of units, and the consumption could be units of time, it could be transactions, number of transactions, it could be physical units, anything that's consumed, right? So in this example, for customer one in Q4, consumed 90 units, and then it dips to 85 units in Q1. So that kind of gives you a 94% NUR in Q1. So our hypothesis really is that the NUR drives net revenue retention, as shown on the right side of the screen. So please note that NUR is a leading indicator, and there's a lag before you see the impact in the net dollar retention, which is shown at the bottom part of the screen. I would recommend tracking this metric and experimenting with it. It works in consumption-based revenue models. It also does work in non-consumption revenue models as well. In those particular models that are non-consumption, you have to pick the right consumption variable that aligns to outcomes. And there's some work involved in that, but it's readily doable. You go to the next slide, Sam. So we're going to talk about that first stage now, that 1 million stage. And so, just talking at a high level, at 1 million, your strategy is really to overcome product market fit issues. And, all of you that have worked at early stage companies, first-time founders, you all realize that you want to just make sure that the product is usable for customers, and overcoming that product market fit is your strategy. And your top goal is really just to attract customers. You want to get customers, you want to get them closed, you want to get them onboarded, and more importantly, you want them to be good references for you. At this stage, the CS organization is relatively fluid. You have no one really dedicated to specialist roles. They're wearing multiple hats, and perhaps these folks may be reporting to a non-CS leader, like either the CEO or a COO is a possibility, possibly even a sales leader. The CS team composition, typically, you'll see 1 to 2 generalists. As I mentioned, no specialized resources. You're wearing multiple hats. And the other team that's typically involved at this stage is your product teams are involved in the onboarding efforts, to make sure that those product feedback loops and product market fit issues are being addressed as well. In terms of kind of a primary thing to think about at this stage, what you really want to be doing is identifying and overcoming these areas of complexity. Every software company, when you start working with customers, there'll be certain things that just pop up. You want to give the product team a heads up on these things. You want to give the sales team a heads up, so in sales processes, they don't become blockers for your deals. The tech stack at this stage is really very basic. I recommend, some folks use HubSpot or something similar at that stage, but really it's your Google tools, Excel, Word, PowerPoint, those types of tools are sufficient at this stage. And really the special sauce, what you want your team doing is working and strongly collaborating with the product team to overcome product market fit. Rule of thumb, I like to see 20% of your recurring revenue on an annualized basis being spent in customer success at this stage of growth. And as you get through this stage of growth and you get towards the end of it, when you get to the next stage, you're heroes at this stage. You really are. You're trying to overcome all of these issues and challenges. But when you get to the end of this stage, you want to overcome that hero mentality. And Sam, if you could go to the next slide. So from an organizational perspective, I have the hero customer journey there mapped out. And what I've tried to show here is what that customer success organization, how it maps against that hero customer journey. And there's really two real functions that you need to start in the beginning. And that's kind of that implementation onboarding function and, the customer success management function, and really that CSM function may not even be focusing as much on expansion efforts at that point, but they are focusing a lot of their efforts on developing trusted advisor relationships and driving adoption. Sam, the next slide, please. So the leader. So what does the leader look like at this stage? Well, there may not be a leader at this stage, as I mentioned. I know many of you, even if you don't want to admit it, have spent an afternoon binge watching Property Brothers. I find it addictive, but then again, my wife describes me as the worst handyman ever. So what makes these guys a fit at this stage? While there's no leader between them, they each have their own specialties. One's kind of focused on selling and real estate. The other one's focused on construction, but they each help each other out as needed. They have that hero mentality that helps them overcome obstacles and really delight their customers. And I do believe that's what you should be looking for at this stage. Sam, next slide, please. So, finally, let's look at some of the metrics at 1 million and really across the 4 pillars. So the growth pillar, your retention metrics are on net revenue, gross revenue, your retention rate, and that newly described metric, net usage retention. Logo churn, really, really important at early stage companies. It's much better to downsell a customer at an early stage than actually lose that logo churn, and so you want to keep a strong eye on logo churn. Net promoter score, it's important to start tracking that early. Now, I will say, I'll preface this by saying there isn't necessarily a strong correlation between net promoter score and revenue outcomes. It is a good measure of customer intent and happiness and kind of directionally how you're going with customers. Obviously, you want to measure how well you're doing with expansion and the usage of your platforms. On the services side, it's really about time to value, measuring how long it takes from sale to kind of that first value. You're measuring CSAT, and you also want to make sure that you're measuring the number of launches you're having by quarter, right? You want to do capacity planning and making sure you're getting customers launched in a timely manner. Some from the support perspective, early stage deals, you'll have a lot of specific unit contract requirements. So you want to keep up with SLA compliance and of course be measuring CSAT. So now let's look at the 5 million stage. And Sam, if you could move to that. So if we look at the strategy at this stage, what you're really thinking about is whatever it takes to establish that beachhead and really establish standard operating procedures. And your goal really should be around gross retention. It should be around not losing business, keeping customers happy, and really starting to pick up on the net usage retention and that metric, right? Because that's going to really predict what happens with net revenue retention. Your CS org at this point, you probably have hired your first CS leader. It's typically the smallest dedicated CS team that might have onboarding support and CSM folks. This is also the time you might want to be thinking about your first ops resource. So you'll have about 5 to 6 folks, a leader, a couple of onboarding folks, a support person, a CSM, maybe a full-time or shared ops person. And really at this point, what you're trying to do is You still may have product market fit issues, but you're trying to develop playbooks that are going to help you just grow and scale. You're going to develop your initial systems of record, project management solutions, support solutions like Zendesk are things that you may want to start building out at this stage. And your key here is your special sauce is going to be implementing the learnings from your execution challenges across the entire go-to-market team. And that's the CS, the product, the sales team, and it could be marketing as well. And really try and improve upon those challenges. At this stage, you typically also want to maintain that 20% ratio with your ARR in terms of how much you're spending in customer success. And as you move to that $50 million stage, you want to kind of start moving away from tactical thinking around what I've just discussed and move to more predictable thinking. Go to the next slide there, Sam. So the organization at this point, you've added a couple of new functions. So you typically have a sales engineering function. This is a bit controversial. I've had several organizations where sales engineering is reported into customer success, and I've led those teams. Sometimes, the sales team, naturally, most times the sales team does lead that. But if you can overcome some, caution with the sales team around that, I think it actually becomes a competitive weapon in the sales cycle. So just consider that. You add a growth or renewals team. And so this team is thinking transactionally about how do you optimize your renewals outcomes? How do you get annualized contract increases? When should you have automated renewals? So this team is thinking about all that. And then you could have a growth or expansion team. This is typically called account managers. And I put some rules of thumbs in terms of kind of benchmarks you can think about when you're thinking about hiring these folks on this slide as well. So those are, a couple of things that you've thought about, obviously building out a fleshed out support team. And then, as I said, perhaps getting that first strategy and ops person on board. Sam, next slide, please. So the leader at the 5 million stage. So the biggest challenge at this stage is really to unlearn that hero mentality. And, product market fits, as I mentioned, may still be a challenge, but you have to shift, towards setting the baseline for future growth. And I hope you all have seen Private Ryan. If you haven't, I'd highly recommend it. The protagonist in the story is Captain Miller, and Captain Miller's job is to ensure that everyone does their job. He doesn't play favorites. He's laser focused on establishing a beachhead in the first scene of the movie. He describes a system, he develops a system that can overcome any one person's failure to establish that beachhead. And he'll do anything to accomplish that goal, even when facing setbacks. So, using Taylor Swift's words, he was kind of the original anti-hero. So when you're looking for your first, CS leader, try to find somebody who can emulate these behavioral characteristics. Sam, next slide. So, new metrics at this stage. So you're going to start looking at assisted revenue. And what I mean here is revenue that is generated directly from the efforts of the customer success team, and you want to track them in your CRM. You want to start looking at the financial aspects of, your services team, and you want to start tracking utilization. In customer support, there's a term called resolution rate. In essence, how long an average does it take to resolve a customer issue? And then you started that community function, as I mentioned, and you're generating content in the community that can be used by the heroes. And you also want to start tracking how well you're consuming, how your heroes and your customers are consuming training materials. Next slide. So 50 million. So the strategy at 50 million, where in essence, and it's 50 million and beyond. I won't necessarily say how far beyond, because that really depends on the type of solution that you have, the complexity, your customers. But I think 50 million to 150 million, this could certainly work. Your strategy is really to develop a mechanism so that you have predictable outcomes for not only your customers, but for the company as well, right? The top goal should be net dollar revenue retention, and talking about that causation link to net usage retention, really use that as a leading indicator. Your CS organization, it's going to be a mature team with kind of all the role specialists. You'll have a dedicated strategy and ops team or a dedicated team within a RevOps team doing these types of activities. And, you should ensure that, the last vestiges of the 1 million when you add heroes, that an employee loss should not impact the outcomes for the company or for customers. So these are the things you should be looking at. And Sam, if you could quickly go to the next slide, that just have a simple org chart that I want to show, then we'll go back to this one. So, what does this team look like? So you'll have what I'll just call a customer success management team, and this will be comprised of CSMs and account managers and what I'll call tech touch or scaled CS folks, and these are doing one-to-many customer reach outs and interactions. You'll have that strategy and ops team, which will typically have renewal specialists. They'll have folks working on data and customer insights. These may not be unique individuals, by the way. There'll be many people doing these same tasks. You'll have some type of FP&A skill set in the team, and then you'll have somebody that's working on all these systems of records that you'll have at this stage of growth. You'll have a support team that will have some tiered support specialists. You'll have a knowledge center where customers can resolve issues. You'll have that professional services team with all the detailed skill sets. You'll have that community team, which will have training folks. You'll have a customer marketing folks. You'll have enablement folks in this team. And then you'll have your sales engineers. If you could go back just to kind of finish clearing the rest of this slide, process operating rhythms. So everything, you should be thinking about all of the interactions and events that happen internally within your organization and with customers on an ad hoc, daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual basis, and try and map those out. At this point, it should be pretty sophisticated. You'll have your robust tech stack, which will have systems of record for each one of those sub teams. Your special sauce is really having that deep knowledge base that maintains kind of that predictability for all the constituencies. Kind of think about, predictability. I think of that Marriott mindset. No matter any Marriott you go to in the world, there's certain common things that you're going to see. So think about that type of mindset. Your cost as a percentage of ARR at this point does start tracking down, typically 10 to 15%. There's a lot of venture capital surveys on these things. I'd recommend you guys look at that, but that's typically what I see, a level around 10 or 15%. And so, Sam, if you could skip 2 slides to the organization. So at this stage of growth, you've got almost a fully fleshed out team. It's shown here. You're putting a bigger focus on strategy and ops, but you've kind of created that community team in full force. You've got all of the specialized professional services function. And then I've got all of kind of the ratios you need to be thinking about and the key considerations for each one of these teams. You go to the next slide. So the hero at the 50 million stage. So when moving to this stage and beyond, the key for the leaders to move the mindset from tactical thinking to a strategic mindset. So the leader at this stage may or not be the original leader that you hired at the 5 million stage. I've done the scaling from 5 million to 200, but you have to evolve as a leader. And I'll tell you, it's not an easy thing. This is the stage where the founder CEO needs to kind of make this evaluation, this decision, whether they need to make a pivot in leadership. So what I look for, I can think of no better person than Maestro Leonard Bernstein. So, for those of you who don't know who he is, he was the Frank Slootman of the classical, music world from the 1950s to the 1970s, really unrivaled. And so what are the things that made him an effective leader? So, first of all, he was charismatic and inspirational. Bernstein possessed a magnetic stage presence and infectious enthusiasm for the music that, really captivated all audiences and his fellow musicians. He was a musical genius. Bernstein's exceptional musical talent and depth of knowledge allowed him to connect deeply with the music he conducted and composed, and also to his audience and orchestra. Mr. Bernstein was a strong communicator. As a conductor, Bernstein was skilled at conveying his interpretations and ideas to the orchestra through precise gestures and expressive movements. He could articulate complex musical concepts into relatable manner, something every leader needs to do, making the music, accessible and engaging for both the musicians and the listeners. Versatility and adaptability. So his ability to cross genres and connect with diverse audiences really, showcased his versatility and adaptability. And then finally, collaborative approach. Bernstein valued collaboration and nurtured, really a sense of camaraderie amongst the musicians he worked with. He really did recognize the importance of teamwork in creating an exceptional performance, and really fostered a supportive and respectful environment. So I challenge you, go find your Bernstein if you're at that stage. Sam, next slide, please. So the metrics at this point, on the PS side, you're focusing on more your financial metrics. You're identifying what your gross margin is. I think a typical good rule of thumb is 50% gross margin. You want to start tracking recurring revenue that's coming specifically from services. On the customer support time, how long, how many back and forth, average number applies to resolve an issue. First time response, how long it takes on average to reply to a customer, and average time to resolution. On the community side, you're tracking the number of certified users, you're looking at the usage of the platform globally, and then you're looking at, I talked about the customer hero journey, really the promotion of those champions and those heroes. Next slide, please. So some of the key takeaways. So I won't go through this in detail, but at the 1 million stage, you're really trying to overcome product market fit. When you move to the 5 million stage of revenue, you're doing whatever it takes to establish that beachhead, establish standard operating procedures. And then, at that 50 million stage, hopefully you're a category leader. You're looking for predictable outcomes for customers and your company. So, now let's talk about what should really matter to the CEO and how the chief customer officer can help support that. So imagine the CEO who's piloting the airship. The CEO is ultimately focused really on two metrics. Really cares about gross churn and net retention. And while it's relatively easy to get and track these numbers, it doesn't really tell the whole story. As the co-pilot, the chief customer officer is tracking all the dials, knobs, switches that keep customers humming along. We already talked about the metrics to watch in the 4 pillars, the PS pillar, the growth pillar, the support and the community pillars, and all the metrics in those. It's really the CCO's job to give color and context to the CEO around gross, churn and retention using these metrics. And, by tracking the detailed metrics, the CCO can translate and level up this color for CEOs and board members. And so look at the usage and the users, look at the value that's being demonstrated, and look at the demonstrated customer delight. And the CCO should be using these things to inform the CEO and the board. Next slide, please, Sam. So in summary, get started early. Don't worry about perfection. Start and iterate. Think of the Japanese Kaizen approach. If you don't have expertise, it's worth the investment of finding an expert. There's tons out there. I do believe that if you do these things, it'll be easier to, for your company to scale. I've advised, many companies at the $1 million level. Personally, I've grown companies from 5 million to 200 million. So I'll kind of leave you with one final thought. And, a cheesy catchphrase that I use often, the only constant in life is change. So, it's really easy to do what has worked in the past and you get comfortable with it. But at each stage of growth, you really need to evaluate what you're doing and determine how to pivot. In most cases, what works at 5 million just really won't work at 50 million. I want to thank you for joining us today. Please use these slides as references. I've given you a taste. Obviously, there's much more detail. I'm happy taking some questions, but also if you're not comfortable or there's some things you just want to share, don't want to share in front of a big group, feel free to reach out to me over LinkedIn. I'm happy to start a dialogue and help in any way I can.
Yeah,
So,
we did just get one question come through, but if anybody else does, please use the Q&A function. It should be at the bottom. But one question that came through, do you want to take a look, Rahul, and read it, or do you want me to read it off for you?
So it looks like the question is we're now getting surprised by when a healthy account churns. I think the competitor is out positioning us. What should CSMs be doing on a weekly basis to prevent this? And how often should CSMs be talking to the economic buyer decision maker? We're at the 50 million ARR scale. So great question. And I'll try to answer it in the best way I can, without knowing a lot of details about your business. So a couple of things that I would be thinking about. So, at a minimum, you should be making sure that if you have account managers at this stage and you have CSMs, they should be developing joint account plans, particularly for your strategic customers or the customers that you think have an impact on your long-term customer, company health. And you should be reviewing those on a weekly basis. That's something that's really critical. As far as customer engagement and interaction, unless it's a really strategic customer, it may be difficult to actually have a detailed, meaningful conversation, particularly with an economic buyer and a decision maker in a weekly basis. But one of the vehicles that you could use is kind of an executive business review. And these executive business reviews should be opportunities to, ask meaningful questions. If you all are familiar with the Challenger sale, there's a lot of good examples. So it's not just about getting the customer to like you or assuaging the customer's issues. It's about challenging the customer and asking provocative questions, which may unearth situations where a competitor may be coming in and introducing FUD, right? You kind of get the opportunity because the economic buyer and the executive champion will be in that meeting, and you should strive to make sure that happens. So I'm not sure if I answered that question, but feel free to reach out, and we're happy to dig into that a little bit more. Any other questions? All right. Well, if there's no other questions, this webinar will be recorded. Thank you so much for joining, and feel free to reach out to me if you have questions. Oh, there's one more cute question that just popped up. What should the CCO VP of CS present to the CEO during the weekly leadership meeting, assuming it is an executive function? So there's a framework I use, and you don't necessarily need to use this framework, but I really love it. It's called Padre, Padre. And if you just Google Padre and Zuora, it's something that I learned from Team Zuo at Zuora. It's a great framework to use, and we have used it at Zuora as well as other companies have recommended it to CEOs to kind of walk through at a departmental level what are the key things that a VP of CS should be presenting. And I think typically, if you're thinking about it at a weekly level, just to kind of give you some high level responses, obviously, looking at net usage retention is something that you can track really, really closely. Some of the lagging indicators doesn't necessarily make sense to talk about on a weekly basis. You definitely want to be bringing up any key customer challenges that are cross-functional where you need to get help, for example, from your product partner or your sales partner. You want to be showing, some other adoption metrics, maybe around usage that you could get from systems like Pendo. But it's, I think that NUR, metric would be a really bold and powerful one to spark conversations in leadership meetings. So next question looks like, what do you find as the right profile for CSMs at different stages? For example, hiring business generalists versus hiring experts in customers' domain or job function. So once again, this is one of those it depends questions. I'll say three things that I always look for, just as a starting point in terms of behavioral characteristics for CSMs. I look for empathy, curiosity, and grit. So empathy, can you align with that hero along their journey, or your coworkers? Because you really are the quarterback and the voice of the customer once the relationship starts going. So empathy, curiosity. So when you're preparing for an executive business review, is this CSM, are they reviewing the quarterly filings if it's a publicly traded company as your customer? Are they figuring out what's going to make the hero look good, what's going to make the economic buyer look good, and are they bringing these things into those meetings? And then grit, every customer relationship will have its ups and downs, and it's really about, not getting frustrated, understanding that you don't represent your company's CS department. So you don't, for example, in my past, I didn't represent Zuora customer success. I represented Zuora. So every time that you're speaking to the customer, particularly in tough times, you've got to represent the entire company. In terms of business generalists versus experts, I do think that does depend on the industry. Highly technical industries, or if you're in the data space or potentially in the technical AI space or security spaces, that might lead yourself more towards the route of having industry domain or expertise. But I find in most situations, a good CSM can adapt. Any other questions? All right, well, great conversation. Thank you once again. Tehi or Sam, any other last closing words?
Just for everybody attending, I'll be sending out the presentation as well to the email you RSVP'd with. So look out for that, as well as the recording to review later. But that's all on my end. Anything else, Tehi?
And Rahul, I just want to thank you for all the time and effort you spent with Sam and preparing for this webinar, putting and then synthesizing your thoughts for companies at the 1 million, 5 million, and 50 million stages. So to help people in their journey. So thank you very much for all your effort there.
It was a lot of fun. And thank you, Sam. I could have done this without you.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Okay.